Hello everyone and welcome back. Amy Lynn here with another card design that I'm going to show you how to make today. This one is a little more advanced. The techniques and the styles that we'll use today are a little more complicated and advanced than the last card that I showed you, but I basically want to just teach you how to use some techniques and make you feel comfortable in trying new things and learning how to make beautiful cards. So today we're going to make a beautiful spring flower. I was inspired to make this card by a card that I received from my pen pal out in California. Sandy sent me a beautiful Easter card, and so I wanted to make her a lovely card to send back. And so this is the design that I came up with. So this is actually Sandy's card here, and I'll be sending this out in the mail to her in a couple of days. So Sandy, if you see this video before you get your card, thank you for the beautiful Easter card that you sent me, and here's the card you'll be getting back. Okay, so I'll start right in and talk about the materials and the tools that we'll be using for this card today. We'll start out with a yellow piece of cardstock. This will be our base. This cardstock is 8.5 by 11, and we will trim that down to be our right size for our card. You'll also need a piece of coordinating pastel. I'm using a pink today, but any color that you want to use would be fine. This is a nice, both of these cardstocks are heavy. They have the linen finish to them, so they're a heavier cardstock, very nice quality, and they look very beautiful. So 8.5 by 11 base, and then another coordinating color. This pink coordinating cardstock will cut down to a 6 3/4 by 3 3/4 piece, and then 2 pieces of cream. One a little bit larger. We'll cut this down to 6.5 by 3.5, and then I've already got a piece that's cut that's 3.5 by 3.5. This piece is cream, but you could use cream or white because this is going to be for the umbrella part. Okay, some other pieces of the products that we'll use today will be our ink pads, and for the rose stamp that I'll be using, I'm using the Color Box chalk ink in the color Chestnut Roan. I'll also be using 2 colors of the Cat's Eye chalks, one ice blue, and I believe this one is pink pastel. And then the stamps we'll use today are, this is a stamp from Stamps Happen, and this is a called Rose Parade, and it's an artist rendition. In other words, it's a piece of artwork that's been turned into a stamp, and the artist of this piece of artwork is Carolyn Shores Wright, and this is a beautiful rose border called Rose Parade. Now when you stamp this, you actually don't get this beautiful colored picture. You get an outline of the roses, and then you just color those in. So you'll also need either colored pencils or watercolors that you can color that in today. I'll be using the Yasutamo, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And these are the pearlescent watercolors. I have had these for sale on my website before. I think I'm out of stock on them right now, but hopefully we'll have those back in stock before too long. But you could use colored pencils or crayons even to color in your rose border. The other stamp I'll be using today is from Stamp It, a company in Virginia Beach. This is an older stamp. I'm not sure that they're even in business anymore, but it's just a cute little umbrella. Of course, if you don't have an umbrella stamp, you could use a bird or an egg or a butterfly. Any stamp that coordinates along with the pretty rose border would be fine. Corner punch. We'll be using a corner punch. I have a Fisker's corner punch. This one's called Heritage, and it has 3 different corner shapes, and we'll be using one of these today. If you don't have a corner punch, that's fine. You could round your corners or even just leave them square. That's fine. And then a border punch. This one's from EK Success. I think this is called Daisy Chain, and this is a border punch that we'll be using to punch the edge of the cardstock. You'll also need, and I have just a pre-cut, a die-cut bird that we'll be using, but any shape from your Cricut would be fine. And I'll also be using some more sheer ribbon, and today I'm using just a really pretty light blue sheer ribbon. Okay, in addition to the stamp pads that I already talked about, because the umbrella that I used in the card is actually embossed, we'll need an embossing pad. I use the Emboss pad from Hampton Arts, but any embossing pad will work. I also will use a craft pad. It's a foam pad that I use when I stamp. I lay my paper here and then I stamp with this on the back, because it's a padded type pad that helps you get a perfect stamp. In other words, if you're stamping on a paper or your desktop and you've got, you know, pencil shavings or glue on there, sometimes you can get lumps and bumps in your stamps. If you stamp on a foam pad, that helps you to get a perfect stamp every time. And because we're embossing, I'll also be using my glitter tray or a speckle tray, and this is basically used to catch any leftover embossing powder, so I can put that back into the jar. The embossing powder that I'm using today is a Hampton Arts embossing powder. It came in a multi-pack, so it's just a real small vial, and this color is like a metallic green color. I'll also be using a few pop dots or dimensionals today, and that's optional, but that is what gives you the raised effect of the umbrella and the bird. So if you have dimensional or pop dot adhesive, that is great. Because we're embossing, we'll also need a heat tool. I use a Darice heat tool, but any heat tool or, you know, embossing gun will be fine. And I will also be using my advanced tape glider, which it dispenses the glue from Scotch. And a small sharp scissors. Anytime you're cutting ribbon, you just need some small sharp scissors. Okay, so those are the tools that we'll be using. I'll probably have to record this card in a couple of different segments because it'll be so long. So probably one, maybe even two or three parts to this instructional video. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started, and the first thing we'll do is cut the cardstock. Now this card is larger than the note card sizes that I normally do. I have already pre-marked my cutter so I'll know the measurements, but the measurement for your information of this particular cardstock, which fits the envelope that I use, that's how I determine how to cut, what size to cut my cardstock, is based on the envelope that I'm going to use. This is a larger envelope, so the cut needs to be 10 1/4 by 5 1/8. So I'll cut my long cut first, 10 1/4, and then I just throw that little extra strip away. Some people actually save that, but I don't save those tiny little bits. And then the next, the width of the card will be 7 inches. So I just measure over 7 inches, hold my cardstock in place, and run the blade down. Now that piece I do keep because I might use that on a border or something later. Now, what that gives me is a cardstock or a card blank that is 7 inches by 10 1/4, and I'm going to fold that over. You could score this if you want to. I usually just try to line up the two edges and then kind of press in the middle and then use my bone folder to crease the edge. Now I have a card blank that's 7 inches wide by 5 1/8, and that should fit my large envelope just fine. Now sometimes if I feel like I'm going to have a lot of embellishments on the front of my cardstock, I will trim maybe just a hair more off that edge to make sure that it fits into the envelope fairly easily. There's our card blank. We're going to just go ahead and set that to the side and cut our other cuts of paper. The next cut is going to be the pink cardstock, and for that piece we'll need a cut of 6 3/4 by 3 3/4. That's going to be, what that will be is the base, the pink piece that's underneath the floral printed piece. The short cut first. So the short cut will be 3 3/4 inches. And then the length is 6 3/4. Okay, and then we'll cut our cream piece. This piece will be what we'll actually stamp the floral border onto, and this piece will be 6.5 by 3.5. So again, I'm going to cut the short cut first, the 3.5. The reason I do that is because if I want to use, I want to keep as much of the paper as I possibly can. So when whatever I'm trimming off, I want to make sure that leaves a nice big piece for something else I can use. If it's real close, then it really doesn't matter. But you know, the less cutting on the leftover paper that I do, the better. Okay, so this one is this length needs to be 6.5. And the way I determine these cutting lengths is when I designed the original card, you know, in my mind I have a certain way I want it to look, and so basically I don't measure, I just measure my base cut for my cardstock, and then all the other pieces that go on I kind of just cut them the way I want them to look. And so for your purposes, for your learning purposes, I had to go back and measure. So it was a graduated cut. The base cardstock's the biggest, then the pink needs to be a little smaller, then the cream needs to be a little bit smaller, and that's basically how I came up with these measurements. And it just so happened that they worked out. The cardstock size is 7 by 5/8, and then I started with the pink size, and that came out to 6 3/4 by 3 3/4, and then the next size down came out to 6.5 by 3.5. Okay, so those are those basic cuts, and like I said, the smaller cream cut is a 3.5 by 3.5 because that's what fits my umbrella. If you have a different stamp that's maybe a little larger, your base piece might need to be a little bit bigger, or if you're using a stamp that's a little bit smaller, you might be able to trim a little bit more off of that. You just need a piece big enough for your stamp. Okay, so that's all the paper cuts. The next step we're going to do is the punch for the front border of the card blank. And that again was done with the daisy chain, and that's an EK Success punch. So I'm going to show you how to do this punch. The way these are made is they're kind of like a 3-hole punch or something like that, except instead of 3 holes it punches this lovely pattern. And this punch has a lip back here in the back to place your cardstock against. And I start with my cardstock as close to the edge as you can get it, with it backed up against the lip. And I'm going to go ahead and stand up because this is kind of difficult punch. It takes a little bit of muscle to do this. So once you've got it in there, kind of hold it with one side on one side so your paper doesn't slip, and then punch. And then you're going to just slide that first punch out, and you can see that there's printed pattern on both sides of the punch. It kind of just helps you line your paper up so you make sure your punch comes out perfectly every time. So I'm just lining up the first punch that I did over top of the pattern that's on the punch, and then I'm ready to punch again. And you kind of just want to line that paper edge up with the lip on the punch. Okay, and then I'm going to line it up again on the next side and hold it in place and punch. And then I should be able to bring it back out to this edge and do the same thing for my final punch. And there we have it. Okay, when you take your punch away, you're going to have lots of little bits under there. Just scrape those off and throw them in the trash. Okay, and then for this card, I did go ahead and chalk the edges just to make that stand out a little bit. And so for that, I will use my cat's eye chalk in the pastel pink and just chalk along the edges of that border punch. And you can also do over top of the flowers if you want to. Just having a little bit of color there over that punched out design just makes it pop out a little bit more. Don't need need a whole lot of color there, and you wouldn't really have to put any if you didn't want to. Okay. Alright, now we're ready to set that to the side and work on the next step. Now the pink piece is just a background piece, and that will just be glued down, so we don't really have to do anything to that at all. We're going to set that to the side. But the next part is probably going to be the most complicated, well, other than the embossing, and will take the longest. So I'm going to show you how to do the stamp and what to do with the flowers, but I'm not going to go through the entire process because that would just take so long. But I'll tell you what to do, and then you can do that on your own. So the cream piece, not the 3.5 by the 3.5 because that's for the umbrella, but the longer piece of the cream, which again is 6.5 by 3.5, is going to be for our Rose Parade border. And so you need, at this point, you need your foam pad for the stamping. You need your cream piece of paper. You need your floral border stamp. And then we're going to use the Chestnut Roan ink pad to stamp this down. So the way I do that is I turn my stamp over so the rubber's to the facing me, and I just want to make sure that there's no bits on there, there's no leftover paper or anything that might have stuck to it, because anything that's between your rubber and the paper is going to cause a blemish in your stamp. Okay. I take my stamp pad, and depending on what kind you have, you might have a raised stamp pad. The way Colorbox does, their lids come completely off, so you're not worrying about the lid being in the way. And it does have a raised stamp pad, and it kind of gives you some handles here to hold on to, and if you don't throw that down, like I just did. And so you want to just take that stamp pad and ink up your stamp really well. Now you don't have to do a lot of pressing here because this is very wet, and so just want to kind of dab it along. And one thing I do recommend to people that don't stamp a lot and to children is if you're not comfortable with stamping, you might want to just practice stamping before you actually put this on your project paper. So I keep my work surface covered with you know, some paper that I can just tape it down, and then I rip it off when it gets dirty. You can see I've got all kinds of little schmutz on here. But a good thing to do if you're not comfortable stamping is to go ahead and just practice stamp on a scrap piece of paper a few times before you actually stamp on your paper. Then once you're comfortable, you ink up your stamp really well. And then you want to just place your stamp kind of as best you can centered on your paper and set it down there, and then just give a couple good presses. Now you don't want to rock the stamp back and forth because you can cause errors in your stamp, and it can also cause what they call halo if you got any extra ink anywhere on the rubber part that you didn't really need it. But you do want to give a good firm press, and this stamp, because it has so much detail, I'm going to actually stand up over it and press with the palm of my hand. But I don't want to rock it. I want to hold it all the time with one hand, hold it into place, and then press with the other, and then just pray for the best. Okay, I feel like that's probably good. So I'm going to take that off, and I got really good detail, but you can see where I applied more pressure, I got a darker impression. This particular stamp, because of all the detail, sometimes I'll have a hiccup in the middle where I didn't get ink, but it does look like I got a good impression this time. So I'm going to just take that pad away, and then you want to clean your rubber stamps with a nice pad, which I haven't talked about that before now, but what I use is a rubber stamp cleaning pad. These are available. This particular kind is from Hampton Arts, and I do believe I have these available on my website. If you're interested in one and you don't see it on there, just message me and I can get you one. But it has these little hairy type cleaning pads on each side that you just rub your rubber stamp back and forth over to get all that ink off. And you can actually use a cleaner on one side and then a dryer on the other. This is already wet from where I've sprayed it before, so I'll just use it to rub my stamp back and forth, and then the dry side to get that cleaned off. And just clean it off the best you can. Some stamps or some inks do stain your stamps, and there's really nothing you can do about that. It doesn't affect the performance of your stamp, but do clean them because that keeps them conditioned before you store them away. Okay, at this point, what you would need to do is take your colored pencils and color this pattern in, or again your pastel watercolors to paint this in. It makes a really beautiful effect when you color these in with watercolor paints. I have already done one that I'm going to use on this card that I painted in prior to the video with these pearlescent paint colors and with my water brush. But so I'm not going to take the time to do that today, but what you would do is just take your colored pencils or your watercolors and paint this in or color this in with your pencils as close to, you know, what the original stamp looks like as you want it to look. If you want it to be different colored roses or a different effect on there, you know, just do what you want it to look like for you. Okay? But I've already done one that I have gotten prepared, and so this is the one that I'm going to use. Now, the only other thing that I really did to this, besides painting it in or coloring it in, was to punch the edges. And that's where that Fisker's Heritage Punch comes in at. Again, this punch has 3 different edges or 3 different corners in this one punch. If you stick your paper in here, you get this design. If you stick your paper in here, you get this one. And in here, you get this one. And these are kind of tricky to use. The way I do it is I flip the punch over and I flip my paper over with pattern side down. And I stick the paper in where I can actually see it coming out in that little corner. And then I will set it down, hold the paper in place, and try to hold the punch. It's kind of tricky, and then press. And then you get a little piece of paper that pops out like that, and your corner will be punched like that. Okay, so you'll do that to all 4 corners. And again, if you don't have a corner punch, don't worry about it. It's just an added, you know, little special touch that can make it look really pretty. But if you don't have a corner punch, you can always round your corners with a rounder, or you could cut them with the scissors to round them, or you could leave them square. There's nothing that says that you have to do it. It's just another added little detail. Okay, and then once I got that done, let's say I had already colored in my roses and I had punched my edges. At this point, I did go ahead with my cat's eye chalks. I did a base color with the dusty pink. And I just kind of gently brush around the edges with that to just show the detail of the edge of that paper. The more I want it to stand out, the darker I do it. But for this one, I just wanted the, you know, ever so slightly light pink border around it. And then I went back, because we're using this on a pink paper, when you put the pink border against the pink paper, it kind of just blends in. So the next thing that I did was I took my ice blue, which is a pastel blue color, and I just went back over it and kind of gave a little more detail. It really made a pretty effect because it almost turns it purple in some places, but it just really makes that border stand out. Okay, once I got that edge chalked the way I wanted it with my cat's eye chalker, and now I've switched over to the stamped piece that I had already watercolored. We're ready to put these parts of the card together. So I'm going to take the stamped image of my rose border, and using my ATG gun, I'm going to just apply a strip of the adhesive along all 4 edges. And then I'm going to place that down on the pink back piece. Kind of just want to center that as best you can, and then press that into place. Now I just switched over to a cleaning cloth because I just happen to think I might have ink or things on my fingers or where I've been handling the watercolor paints. You just want to be careful when you're applying your adhesive that you don't get fingerprints or other inks and things on your cream paper. That will ruin it, and you'll have to be really creative to fix that. Okay, so the last step I'm going to do to this piece before I glue it down to the cardstock is stamp my sentiment here. On Sandy's card, I stamped the sentiment, "Your friendship makes my heart happy." So I want to stamp that on to the top part of the rose border. And this is just a small stamp, a little sentiment stamp that I believe came from Stamping Up. It was part of a multi-set, I believe. And I'm going to use Wisteria Purple from Colorbox. I didn't mention that earlier in the supplies. If you have a limited supply of inks, you certainly can use the same ink color over and over again. But I do have several colors of ink, so I like to try to coordinate my stamping inks with the colors in the card. And I probably should have used my stamping mat under there, but I didn't grab that in time. So okay, so I stamped my sentiment, "Your friendship makes my heart happy," and now I'm ready to glue that onto the card. So again, I'm going to use my ATG gun to apply adhesive. I am going to go ahead and put adhesive on all four sides of both of these pieces just because they're heavy cardstock and they're kind of wrinkly. Where I painted these flowers, water can make your paper wrinkle just a little bit, so I want to make sure it gets a good tight seal to my card. And again, I'm just going to kind of line that up the way I like it, and once I'm happy with it, just press it down. Okay, at this point I can go ahead and tie on my ribbons, so we'll do that. And again, I'm using sheer ribbon, and I'm going to show you just the way that I do my ribbons, which is, as I stated in my other videos, you can cut the measure what you need and cut it off if you'd like. I just find it easier to just work right with the ribbon on the roll. And so I just, with the ribbon still attached to the roll, I pull some ribbon through the inside of the card and get a nice piece that I know, where I know I'll have enough to tie a bow and have some enough to clip the ends off. And bring that together and then just kind of tie a bow. The more you do this, the better you will become at it, the easier it will become. I know some people are really, intimidated by tying bows and things like that. It just takes practice. It's like anything else. The more you do it, the easier it becomes, and you just, practice at it. And actually, I'm going to undo that because I didn't put a bow on my original card. I just tied and had loose ends. So I double tie it, tie it together and then tie it together again, kind of like, knotting it. Because I forgot I put the bird over top of that. I didn't make a bow. You could put a bow there. If you didn't have a little bird to put on the card or another little embellishment to put on there, could just make a cute little bow. Okay, so I put way too much ribbon on there, but I'm going to go ahead and just clip that off. See, sometimes you make boo-boos, you improvise. That's the thing about it is you want it to be fun and enjoyable. Don't feel so much pressure. Don't feel like everything has to be perfect or just right, because hey, you're going to make some boo-boos and mistakes, and things are going to happen. But you just have to kind of remember it is a handmade product, and it's not always going to be perfect. The trick is to make what you have look good. Okay, so this will be ready to glue our little bird down. I am going to go ahead and put a couple of glue dots there behind the ribbon to hold it into place. So I've got my Elmer's mini glue dots here. And again, I'm going to use my X-Acto knife to lift that glue dot off the reel there. And I'll just put one little glue dot behind the knot in the ribbon and press that down. And then if I wanted to, I could actually take a couple extra glue dots, and I think I will, just because I'm going to be putting a little bird here. So I'm going to take another glue dot and put on this side on the paper, and then press my ribbon, my little tail there, onto it to make that kind of stick up. And I'm going to do the same thing again if I can find another glue dot on here. Almost out. That's just going to help my little ribbons to stick up behind the bird when I place the bird on there. Okay, so this is the little bird I'm going to use. Again, it was just a pre-made die-cut bird. And it actually has a little bit of an embossing on the bird. I hope you can see that raised detail. And anytime you got a piece of cardstock, a chipboard, or a die cut that has raised detail on it like that, you can always use ink just lightly across the top of that raised detail. The ink will just kind of hit the high spots and just make that detail pop out a little bit more. So I took my pastel pink and hit the highlights there, and then I think I'll just rub over it with the blue just for a little extra pizzazz. I'm dropping my inks today. Alright, once I've got that the way I want it, just kind of toy around with the way I want to position it. And because I'm going to place this bird over where I've already tied some ribbon and made a knot, it's already popped up a little bit, and that's the effect that I want it to have. I want it to look like the bird is floating above the ribbon. So I have a product here from ThermoWeb that is called 3D foam squares. That's probably one of my favorite dimensional adhesives. Basically, this has got adhesive on both sides of the sticker with a little bit of foam in the middle, so it just gives you a little bit of height to the things that you place on your projects. And I'm going to use about 3 dimensionals. These are 1/4 inch dimensionals, so they're just really tiny. And you just place them down on the back side of your chipboard, your paper, your flower, whatever you're gluing down, and then just peel that backing off. Sometimes it's a little difficult to get off because it's so small. And then I'm just gonna kind of find where I like that again and push it down. Okay, and there we have that. And then the last step's going to be embossing our umbrella. So I'll see you in the next part.